Have you wrestled with imposter syndrome, excessive and unsubstantiated self-doubt coupled with an uncanny lack of confidence? I'm your host, Betty Danowitz. Listen as I interview highly successful individuals about their experience with this imposter syndrome and how it manifests itself in their lives in this If You Ask Betty podcast series dealing with imposter syndrome. Hi, Nicole. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Hi, Betty. It's always nice to hang out with you. Glad to be here.
And you too, and your awesome pink background with the purple disco ball. And it just gives me, it makes me want to go sing karaoke.
The story behind these, actually, there's a few of them on my wall, is one of my clients left her director of L&D job and became a full-time artist. And so I bought all her prints.
Oh, how amazing.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That is an awesome story. Okay. Nicole, tell us about you.
Wow, that's a question. If you're listening to this podcast and you're interested in L&D, then I can tell you the nerdy professional side of me is that I am a former English professor turned instructional designer who just sort of kept falling into the next thing. So, I say whatever I resisted is what happens. So I was like, I never would want a corporate training job that's selling out. Corporate instructional design. I never would want to be a freelancer. Became a freelancer. I never would want to own an agency. So, the last 2.5 years I've been running an agency. And so that's kind of the story of my professional life, if you will. And then on the non-professional side, I'm a mom of a 3-year-old. She's pretty awesome. And I like to ride horses and dance. So I'm a eclectic nerd.
At the same time, you ride horses and dance at the same time, or those are separate hobbies?
If I could, I would. I have to look into some vaulting. I don't have that kind of skill yet.
I'm trying to imagine what that looked like. So it's kind of, anyways. What would you say are your biggest accomplishments in life and in work?
In life, totally cliche, but my daughter's a pretty big one. Just raising her and doing all right. I mean, we all make mistakes as parents, but I think we have a really fun relationship, even though she's a toddler, and I hope that stays. And just, that's been a really big thing for me. I always say becoming a parent is like joining a secret club. And you just learn things about yourself you really never knew you never knew. So that's been really interesting. Professionally, it was a big deal for me to get a PhD. In my 6th grade yearbook, there's a quote about what you want to do when you grow up. And it was I want to be a fashion designer with a PhD. My sewing equipment sits on the other side of this table and it barely gets used. I'm not very good at it, but I am theoretically now a fashion designer with a PhD.
You made that happen.
I made it happen. And then, the agency is a big deal to me because I have been able to hire people who I really enjoy working with and who trust me, and knowing I'm responsible for them is a big deal for me. So I would say those are the big ones.
Very good. What if I were to ask others this question? If I were to ask them, tell us about Nicole, tell us about her biggest accomplishments, what would they say?
I'm going to guess something similar. I'm not sure. I probably have never asked. I would assume it's in that vein, though.
Okay.
I think those are the things that probably look good on paper. Oops, sorry. Yeah. Those are the things that probably look good on paper, right? It's like mom, PhD, business owner.
Sure.
Check. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What would, if I were to ask Vanessa about you or Robin, what would they say?
Let's give them a call. No, I'm just kidding.
I'd like to phone a friend, please. Yeah.
I'd like to phone a friend. I would. Robin always tells me I have a playful spirit, and I feel like she would say something along those lines, that I bring that energy to the work that I do. And Vanessa, I think she's a true, not that Robin's not a true genuine friend too, but Vanessa lives 20 minutes away. So I can call her and go have lunch with her if I need to. And I think we both appreciate that. We find in each other this, what's the word I'm looking for? Unapologeticness, it just,
sure.
We are who we are. and we enjoy business and we enjoy being mothers, and we don't want to have to apologize for doing one or the other. And so I think the accomplishment is being that kind of friend who you can just go to.
Yeah, I like it. So what has been your experience with imposter syndrome?
Like this conversation? I mean, just even sitting and talking about that was super uncomfortable. So that's been my experience with imposter syndrome. From forever. I think I recently started therapy, and my therapist will say, like, well, you'll take the blame for everything, but you won't accept the what's the word that I'm looking for? You won't accept basically that you accomplished something. Like, I tend to talk about it as if it's a fluke, or right before, like, I stumbled into it. It got seated in my lap. And so that's been my experience throughout my life, for whatever reason, remains to be explored in therapy.
Sure. So you'll take the blame, but you won't accept the acclaim.
Yes, that's probably a good tagline for it.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you if you've experienced this recently, but I feel like you're kind of experiencing it now. So I think that's the answer. Let me ask this. When you are experiencing imposter syndrome now or in other times, how does it manifest itself? And this is kind of what I mean by that. Like, for some people, it's perfectionism, it's overachieving, it's self-sabotage, maybe it's hiding or masking. What do you experience? What happens for you?
It's definitely, it starts with discomfort, right? Just like you could, if you're watching, which I don't know if you person then would be watching this because it's a podcast, but if you're watching it, like, you see me physically get uncomfortable, right? I'm like shifting in my chair and kind of doing things, and I know it's happening. So then I get more subconscious about it. But in terms of like behavior or like impact on work, I think I scare myself out of things, or like I assume behaviors from others before asking or before taking the risk, because I just assume the answer is no, or like I assume that I understand how that person is going to react to my request before it even happens. And then I do it, and 9 times out of 10, that's not what happens, you know? So I think it's perfectionism, but not in terms of like, I'm going to scan my work 100 times. It's more like, I don't want to take the ask and risk, I guess, the ego.
So you sort of say no before you can really even evaluate or try. Maybe that's the better thing to say. You say no before you can even try.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I kick
So you're like,
myself a lot. You know, I just deal with it sometimes and get past it. But that is the inclination. It'll be like, oh, we can't take this bigger. Here's a good example, right? We can't take this bigger contract because we don't have the right people. Let me give it to somebody else who has that. And then later I go back and I'm like, I know hundreds of ITs and freelancers. Like, I could have just asked someone to be on my team and train them up. Like, we do it all the time for projects. Well, why did I say no to that? You know? So I recognize moments like that in myself.
Yeah. Yeah. What else? Any other behaviors that you recognize that happen? So it's sort of, we talked about, that's a little bit of it's sort of a version of self-sabotage, right? It's because you kind of say no before you even try, like you sort of shortchange what you can actually do. What else? Any other feelings or behaviors that you notice when imposter syndrome is happening?
Sure. I mean, in terms of introduction, I think I don't always know how to talk about myself, or necessarily to highlight the things that I probably, like, I do minimize probably my own accomplishments, and that can be to the detriment of the work that I'd like to be doing. So that's definitely not a great behavior. Would not advocate for that in others. Yeah, I guess it does kind of manifest as like light self-sabotage. You know, I'm not like destroying my work or anything like that, but maybe I'm not getting out ahead or doing bigger things because I'm putting my own self-imposed limitations for no reason. Because then, you know, like, if I go back, the nice thing about being in therapy now is like the questions are like, well, you know, why do you think that? And I'm like, well, I don't really know why. And I'm like, you know, things just happen good. And they're like, no, you think that because there's a track record of it working out that way. Like, there's evidence that you're going to figure it out. I'm like, oh, I guess that is there.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you find that here's a question for you. Do you find that in therapy, when your therapist asks you questions like that, like, why do you think that is? Do you hesitate to answer? Do you have a hard time answering that?
I wouldn't
Because the
say,
answer is that you did it or you did something. Like, you see where I'm going with that? Like,
yeah, I think my narrative is part of the challenge that I'm working on, right? Because it isn't like I usually have an answer as, um, I'm like talkative, so I usually have something to say, or at least I have a stupid joke to tell about it because I'm not comfortable with it. But it's the story that comes out, and usually the story that comes out is probably closer to how I'm feeling, and then we kind of backtrack from there. So it might be like we were talking about stress at work because there was a period last year where it was very quiet in our industry, and I took that personally. I was like, I've never not had leads. Like, what am I doing wrong? I'm worried about the team. Am I going to make payroll? All of these things. And so the conversation became like, well, you figured it out. Like, you're going to figure it out. And I was like, well, everything kind of just falls in my lap, like, I was like, my PhD, I kind of just met, the director of the department or whatever. And that's why I got put in there, So like the narrative really is or becomes like, oh, these are just accidents of chance, instead of like, these are things that yes, they're part accidents of chance, but like I prepared for the moment. And so that's then the shift that has to happen, or that am working towards. And sometimes I do get that space, and then it's a different conversation.
yeah. Yeah. So sometimes it's you're saying, so your narrative is that it's either by happenstance, an accident, or, which makes me laugh a little bit, just because hearing it on the other side, like, nope, that your PhD wasn't an accident. It wasn't. It was hard ass work is what it was. Your work.
And so like, I have to own that, and that becomes a difficult thing for me fully to be like, oh, it was hard.
You'd much rather give credit. You'd rather give credit to somebody else rather than accept the credit yourself.
Yeah, I don't even know if it's give credit to someone else. Maybe that is it. I'm not even sure. So this is like therapy right now, I feel like. But there is that narrative. I feel like, because I don't know that I didn't struggle, but maybe I look back through rose-colored glasses, but I don't see the struggle, which it was not easy. But so I look back and I'm like, well, I just kind of, I applied to these schools and I just happened to get into this one, so I went with it. And then the next story is exactly like, I got to the end of my ID job and everybody got laid off, and I just happened to like have a good relationship with the client, so they brought me in as a consultant, and that was my like, I didn't have to go and knock down doors. And so I skipped the part where it's like, well, I worked with that client for 2 years and brought up like hundreds of training modules for them, and I like totally revamped their aviation training. I like that part of the narrative I skip, and I don't know why.
So skipping tracks. I see.
Yeah. They like make it easier than it seems.
Yeah. So when you think about the way that this imposter syndrome manifests itself through skipping tracks and what else did we say? Sort of giving credit to others, or just deflecting credit from yourself. A level of perfectionism that isn't really about your work being perfect, but you're not going to necessarily take credit because it wasn't perfect. When you think about that, are there other contributing factors? Okay, so like we've talked in previous episodes about like some of the common triggers, like when somebody's new or there's a new job and things like that are understood, sort of common triggers. But what I'm wanting to know is there something else about you, or about something, in your past that you feel like makes this imposter syndrome phenomenon happen? Like, is there something else that triggers it or makes it worse?
It's definitely not being new. I'm very comfortable being like uncomfortable. You can drop me in, and if I look stupid, then that's fine with me. I don't take myself that seriously. I think it's the reverse. It's almost, it is really scary to be put on a pedestal. Like I think that's when I get the most uncomfortable. It's like if someone's like, you're a thought leader, you're an expert, and I'm like, I have so much left to learn. Like, please do not take me as the source of all information here. That definitely is like a trigger for me to
Mm-hmm.
just feel like, nope. But also, like, I think there's an interesting dichotomy there because, you know, when I skip in my own mind all the hard stuff, it is because I genuinely believe like anyone can do it, and that's part of it too. Um,
Uh-huh.
Not that I'm not special, but just that like I think anything is doable with if you take the right steps. And so there's kind of like it's at odds, like that belief, like to believe that you're unique and special versus like anyone can be unique and special, you know?
Yeah. So if somebody said to you, you're unique and special, which by the way, you are. What are the thoughts? What are the thoughts and feelings? Now, I will say that your shoulders got a little higher, closer to your ears when I said that, just for the people that are listening only. And you suddenly could reach your elbows with your opposite hands. So what like what happens when I tell you that? Or you like, what's your initial gut reaction?
um, just, yeah, I think
You're when I say you're
speechlessness.
special, Nicole.
I think intuitively, I know that every human is special, and I genuinely believe that. And I don't know, it just makes me uncomfortable for what reason. I have no idea. Like, I can't trace it to a moment in my life and be like, this is the moment where I didn't want to
Sure.
be seen. Um, and it's, again, it's like a really weird dichotomy because, like, I am out there in public. I talk to people all the time, but yeah, I don't really know what makes me so uncomfortable about it. If I could figure that
Mm-hmm.
out,
Yeah.
I probably could
Well,
work through
and I
it.
think the people there are lots of folks listening that feel the same way. They don't know why they're so uncomfortable. And that's sort of why I wanted to do this next round of interviews, is to see if folks hear in someone else what they're also feeling, you know. Is it okay if I take a couple more deeper dive questions?
I'm an
Is that
open
okay?
book. But
Okay.
yeah. But I mean, I
Okay.
was just thinking about what she said too before we get there, which is just, I
Sure.
think social conditioning has a lot to do with it. And there's never been a moment in my life, you know, as a woman, you definitely get conditioned a certain way. I mean,
Sure.
that maybe men may not have the same experience, and there's that. But like, there was never a conversation in my household about, you know, don't be like, people celebrated accomplishments in my household, so it wasn't like a childhood thing. But I think when you see how people treat other people who are kind of put in that position of leadership, or put in, I don't want to say idolize, that's a really strong word, but like, I guess put on the pedestal, like kind of just made to feel
Mm-hmm.
a little bit different. And you see how people react to that. I think that's probably part of it subconsciously, like just thinking about it now, you know, like if you think about the internet, just think about a day in Taylor Swift's life. Like, I don't want to be Taylor Swift and deal with all of that internet hate, you know?
It's a
And
lot.
it's a
Mm-hmm.
lot. And so it's probably easier just to deflect and be like, I'm not really so super. Like, can we not?
Yeah. So what is your, I'm gonna say this, you might not know what I mean, but what's your birth order? Are you an only? Are you
Yeah.
a firstborn? Are you
I'm
which
a
one?
first of three. I have a
Mm-hmm.
younger sister who's about 4 years younger, and a younger brother who's 6 years younger.
Okay. So I knew that, but I also wanted to throw only in there because just in case, because sometimes only children also have similar traits as you. It's the, it's the. I don't know if you've ever read the birth order book.
No, but I've read one of Jonah Berger's books that talk influence,
Okay.
and it talks about the similar.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's fascinating. But I also think that when Mercury's in retrograde and everything breaks is fascinating. So take it as you will,
And I'm a
right?
Virgo,
I
so
mean,
you know.
I'm not, yeah, I'm not 100%. I'm not saying it's true. I'm just saying it's fascinating how much things align. And firstborns are hardworking. They're going to do what needs to be done without asking most of the time, but don't want to be the center of attention. No, thank you.
Yes. Yeah, that sounds true.
Middle children, on the other hand, they typically don't want to do very much work, and they want a lot of attention because they get none. The baby gets all the attention and does no work. You're smiling and giggling. I'm thinking that you're thinking about your siblings and you're like, oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my sister works real hard. I'll give her that. She's definitely not that, but we are very different. personality wise. And I think I do,
Mm-hmm.
you know, when you look at the birth order stuff, I do fall into a lot of those categories. And we actually talk about it because I think I hired all firstborn women on my team, except for
Mm-hmm.
Diego, who, you know, does not identify as a woman for sure. So he has kind of like, we joke about that because there's three of us with that energy. And then poor Diego has to manage it all. And then in my own, like, my husband's also a firstborn of three. So we kind of mirror each other in terms of
Yes.
brother and sister ages. And in college, I had only children as roommates for like 4 years. So like these are conversations
we're
we've
different.
had. Yeah,
We're different. I'm an only.
Yeah.
But you probably knew that.
Yeah, I kind of got that.
Yeah, you probably knew that. Yeah, and I think that's interesting because I wonder if they were to do a study, how much more common firstborns with imposter syndrome might be, because I think there's a lot of pressure put on the firstborn, even as a parent you are trying not to do that, it happens anyways.
Yeah, my poor daughter.
Because it's not necessarily it's not necessarily coming from anybody. It's just part of the order, right? And so as the firstborn, you tend to have a level of pressure to perform that can make you feel inadequate just out of just the natural way things fall. Like nobody did anything on purpose. It's just you're firstborn, so you got to make sure things are taken care of.
Yeah, the guinea pig for all things. I'm also
you are absolutely.
My dad is first. You know, I'm first generation American on my dad's side. So I think that, you know, when I talk to Rocio, our project manager, if you ever have a conversation with her, she has similar experiences being firstborn. Well, technically, I think her daughter is first generation American. And so there's all that extra layer too of just like, well,
sure,
you've got this opportunity. Don't fuck it up. Excuse me if you need to bleep that one out.
Nope, we're leaving that in. Absolutely. And because that's the thought track, right?
Oh yeah.
And even though you may not recognize any like a level of perfectionism in the back of your mind, the don't fuck it up part is the make sure it's perfect.
Oh yeah. I mean, it makes total sense to me.
Make sure it's as good as it can be. Like it has to be. There's no good enough. Doesn't exist.
Yeah. But on the same note, like I think you do get that conditioning subliminally or subconsciously.
Yes.
Like it's not
Agreed.
like, because my parents would never say stuff like that. You know, they would never be like,
right.
You're messing up, except for the one time I got like a C on my report card. But that's a story for another day. But like generally, they're pretty laid back about whatever. Like they didn't, you know, put me into like travel sports and like live vicariously through me or anything like that. Like I never felt like I had to be perfect, but you do get that messaging somehow.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying is somehow it's innate. What's innate?
Innate
in the firstborn, or even an only. And it could be in any birth order, right? But it just seems to be much more common in firstborns. Thank you for letting me kind of go down that path because I had this like feeling. I really didn't know, those listening, I had no idea what her answer was going to be, but I had a guess that it was either an only or, but you're too kind to be an only. You're too sweet. Like you're not cutthroat enough. We have to be cutthroat. Otherwise, like there's nobody else to like,
Yes.
There's nobody else.
That's true.
Like, you see what I mean? There's no one else. There's no one else to point to. So we gotta. Yeah,
that's funny. My sister's the one with the backbone. Yeah, definitely.
That's funny. So, okay, last question for you. Why did you want to be part of this imposter syndrome project?
Well, because you asked me, Betty.
That's fair.
That's fair, right? Like I really admire you, and you always do a great job with the podcast. So, like, yes, there was that, and then I think the other part is like I do acknowledge that even though I like to deflect, like I know enough people in the industry that, you know, are getting started or just here that have said, you know, I follow what you do or I look up to you. And I think it's important as somebody who does have power as a business owner, like nobody above me is going to be like, you had that conversation and it was inappropriate, you've got to go, or like, you don't trust your own judgment, I don't think you should work here. So like, it feels like it's my responsibility to let people know that this is genuinely how I think. And even though I deal with it, it's okay. Like, I would do better, and I do better when I get past it and when I manage the little voices. But it's also just a reality. Like, that's my burden to bear. That's my thing I have to deal with. Some people have tempers, some people have other stuff. This is mine. So that's it.
I love that. Thank you for that very vulnerable and authentic answer, and for all your vulnerability throughout this whole episode. Thank you so much, Nicole, for sharing your experience with us, honestly. And thanks to the listeners. I hope you'll continue with this series and hear more stories about dealing with imposter syndrome. There are so many amazing people that deal with this every day. And by sharing their story, it helps them and it helps you feel less alone. So be sure to follow If You Ask Betty on LinkedIn and YouTube for more episodes and resources about imposter syndrome. Oh, and tell your friends, hit that share button so they also know that they are not alone. Peace out.